I saw Purnima coming, so I did not recognize.
Okay, so yeah, he's going to be here.
Okay, I'll give it to her. Yeah.
Vipul is going to be.
Okay, cool. So, is that all? Okay. Oh, I need the documents. See you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Yes.
Which campus is that? Is that 113?
111. 113, the P is already there.
Right downstairs?
Yeah. 1P is there, I think so. Should I go and?
Oh yeah, go ahead. Because I think. Two more.
Okay.
That's really interesting. I was just in this class that I think you're enrolled in. I see you over there, so. How was it?
111. Hi. 111. I didn't drop. Okay, I didn't count the days. All right. Yeah, 111 is here. So should I do something? Okay. Thank you.
I brought my resume. Look at it. I haven't done anything else.
Just.
It was this morning. I was like still waking up. I mean, if you have enough time to sleep.
Yeah, it's just a fun.
Where did everyone go?
But yeah, so to all 6 of you assembled, I will give my speech of the university should have a non-class day in the calendar for the career fair, right? Because this is dumb, because we've got 6 people sitting here, and all, of course, everybody at home, because, you know, they're there. But the other thing is you put students in this awkward position of like I got half a dozen emails this morning from like, I'm going to be at the career fair. Like, okay, like you shouldn't be pushed into this weird institutional spot where you're choosing between career and class. So that's my speech, especially in the fall semester. Like we've got that stupid fall break day.
Oh, yeah.
That's just good enough to throw everything off if you teach a Monday-only class. And so just have it that day or use that day for it. Well, nobody puts me in charge of such things. So I figured we'd be lean in here today. So what I'd like to do is probably have a short class to begin with, but just open it up to all 6 of you to get any questions you have about anything. It could be about color, but it could be about typography, lingering.
On Monday used some palette website. You know what it was called? It was
There
like
were
palette
2 that I
something.
used. Yes, and actually I just posted this morning.
Oh, you posted it?
Well, I posted the next production problems, 4 and 5. And 5 actually asks you to interact with Peloton.
Oh, perfect.
So, and the thing that's, so the production problem that you'll be asked to do gives you a few different sort of scenarios, and then you're supposed to go find a color palette with them. So if you're asked to do a triadic palette or something like that, you can play with this, and of course you can adjust how wide of an angle you get on the triads, right? And then you can play with shades and tints. But the thing that if you are eagle-eyed, you'll notice is that there's this long UID associated with it. So once you have a palette that you actually like, you can save that thing. So even if I make like a tiny little adjustment, you'll see that something up here has changed. So this maintains a unique URL every time you go. So And I always like to start, and I think I actually gave you the starter URL so that you get the preview that has the text on it, because that's an important thing to consider, because very few of us. Yeah, sure. And again, there's funny ways that color gets represented, like this is trying to have its cake and eat it too. So the sort of outer part tends to be more specific shades of things, whereas the inner part of the circle is more of a continuous line. Which again is something that's fascinating about color, because any sort of like slice of the color wheel that we put out is part of a continuum, right? There's not really a part where green stops and yellow begins. It's just at some point in this part of the wheel, you start to get more yellow than green. It also causes interesting things to happen in terms of how we talk about color. Like you can't talk about a bluish shade of yellow. You're talking about green. You can't talk about a reddish shade of green, right? Happens when we get red and green put together?
Christmas.
Well, but if we mix...
I know what you mean.
Yes, you're right. Christmas, but then also if we mix red and green pixels, right, that's exactly how we go about generating yellow color. All right? Yeah, the other palette, I should just post these links on Basecamp. The other one that I used is...
It was like an Adobe one, right?
Yeah, it used to be called Kuler, Kuler. Now it's just color.adobe.com. This one is okay. The biggest thing I don't like about the interface is it's these big blocks of color. And, right, I mean, we determine how well a color looks based on the other colors that are with it. So this sort of ribbon of color, there's no way to really distinguish or have anything intelligent to say about a color that's way down here versus a color that's way over here, especially when you've got three other colors that are sitting in between it, right? So tread cautiously with any of these things. Other questions for the now 7 of you who are here?
What were you originally going to talk about?
I was going to talk about material design. One of the readings for this week is the Google Material Design Guide. And it covers everything, like every Google app, parts of the Android interface, all of this is sort of dictated by this overall design guide that Google put together. It's at material.io. That's the main URL for it. And so you can read all about their goals and principles. Some of the things that they do is that they determine that all of the, ooh, that's kind of cool. This is like blended. I've got purple up here. Mixing pigments. That every piece of material in the UI design is supposed to be a pixel tall. And they get into very specific things. So if you take an image or a card or something like that, that it has very specific dimensions. It's all aligned on what's known as an isomorphic grid. Do you all know what isomorphism is when it comes to perspective? This is some of my favorite, like I've always tried to do these things and I lose patience about a half hour in. Isomorphic pixel art. Yeah, that's a good one, except it's way too small. Oh my God, the internet connection. I was just on this page, come on. There, this one's a little bit more, if it ever comes up. So, if you ever took like a junior high art class, right, you know that in Western art, there's a horizon. And from that horizon, we get something known as a vanishing point, right? So if you wanted to draw, and of course this is a little exaggerated, but if you wanted to draw a building or something like that, right? And here's its door, and here's a window, right? You get these very specific lines based on the vanishing point. And of course, if we're going back to talk more about our perception, right, our eyes know that the building isn't shrinking. We've learned to see in such a way that when we see this kind of representation, we assume it's the same thing. It's just part of it is farther away from us, right, than the other part. In an isomorphic, and now I'm freaking out because I just said isometric. I think it's isomorphic. In isomorphic representation, there's just basically like the way it's usually drawn is there's just rectangular grids of things, and everything is exactly the same size. So if we build a building here, right, and we put a little window on it, and here's a door on this side. If we've got another building up here.
I think it is isometric.
Is it isometric? Maybe that's why I'm getting such crummy.
Google imaged isometric, and it's all like
Yeah,
stuff.
I probably have some other term that's stuck in my head. So you can see these things get wildly detailed, like it's very Where's Waldo. But if we look closely, you know, somebody has gone and tried to draw all of these pixels in a very specific way. So that's just to say, in an isometric, let's good old Webster's dictionary figure out where isomorphic showed up in my brain today. Okay, isomorphic works too. Identical in form or shape. Isometric. Yeah. Well, neither one appears on its surface to be completely wrong, but if Akvila is turning more images up on isometric, then maybe I'm just crazy. But yeah, good old 8-bit video games and things like that allowed us to do this. So there's no perspective in here. Everything is exactly the same size. If you move it around the grid, it still remains the same size. Okay, that's the point of isometric versus something that has perspective on it. Okay, that's a very long segue to talk about what Google is doing here. So part of what they do in their guide is they outline uses of color. And again, this is for the particular Google style of doing visual design. This is not a set of eternal principles that are true for all things. So for example, they say color in material design is inspired by bold hues juxtaposed with muted environments, deep shadows, and bright highlights. Right, so if we look at their palettes, they've got all of these really rich hues, right? Here's our red, here's our pink, and they've assigned digits to all of these things. So there's 500 pink, 500 red, which of course is set into a cluster. You'll notice that numbers that are, and again, this is not a universal given to us by the gods kind of thing. This is just Google's own in-house rules, right? What can we say about these colors that have numbers that are less than 500? What are they? Yes, they're lighter, but what do we call that when you mix white? They're a tint, right? And if we go above 500, right? See, this is poor interface design right here. I want to see my high numbers at the top and my low numbers at the bottom. But if we go below, or rather above 500, then we're getting what? Shades, right? These are the colors as they get mixed with black. And then there are 4 or 5 colors on each of these that have an A in front of them, which are meant to be used as accent colors that help them pop out in some particular way. So there's our red and pink. They've got blue and violet shades, or purple and purple, deep purple, blue and indigo, light blue, good old cyan. Right, then we get into our yellows and greens and oranges. So they're moving in their own particular way around the color wheel. And then here we're getting into what we didn't really talk about so much on Monday, which is neutral colors. Like brown is a very neutral color. What do we mean when we say that color is kind of neutral?
Isn't too warm or cool?
Yeah, it's sitting right there in the middle. And those can be really good colors to use if you're presenting photographic material and other stuff that needs to stand out a little bit more. All right, then we've got our blue-gray. And then just in case anybody was confused, there's black and white. 000 and FFF. Okay? All right, and then they have specific rules that they lay out for how a palette should get formed. So it says your app's color palette may be defined by using custom palettes suited to your brand, such as monochromatic, black and white, full color, or neutral. Alternatively, you might use the material design color palette. All of these should include sufficient contrast between different UI elements. What do we talk about when we mean contrast? I said it a few times on Monday, but I don't know if I really drove home the idea of contrast. What's the highest contrast you can have possible on a computer screen? What's that? 3 something?
Is it like, because you have like brightness maybe like 255 or something?
Oh, sure, yeah. So if you have full 255, what is the highest contrast to that? 000, right? White and black. You don't get any higher contrast than white and black, right? This is our entire, if you go and find an old school green screen CRT, right, there was no even shade of gray on that. There was just the pixel was on or the pixel was off. So we still have that preserved to a high degree with black and white. So the closer that a color combination approaches what you see with black and white, that means it's a very high contrast. If we look at a very light gray on a slightly darker light gray, there's very little contrast, and so that becomes harder to read, right? But it also lends itself to subtlety. Okay? Now, here it's saying using the material design color palette, it says limit your selection of color to 3 hues from the primary palette and 1 accent color from the secondary palette. Okay? These are what are known as safe guidelines, right? They are guidelines that are meant to help people avoid trouble, such as by going berserk and trying to design an interface that has 9 or a dozen different colors on it, something like that, right? Everybody know the rule in English, you should never end a sentence with a preposition, right? Is that true? No, it's not. Your English teacher lied to you. Just like your English teacher lied to you when you were told that you should never start a sentence with and or but. Your English teacher lied to you when you were told you should never use I or you in your writing. I'm sure some of your professors continue to lie to you to this day about that particular rule. Your professors lied to you about the use of contractions in formal writing. Also a big fat lie, right? You're not supposed to say it's. You're supposed to say it is. This is top on my mind right now because we're going through this part of grammar in my editing class. But rules like this, like use only 3 colors, right? If you want to make a high-impact website for little color value, what 3 colors should you pick? Right? Go with the Coca-Cola logo and perfectly presented until this other stuff filled in. Right? What's the Coca-Cola palette?
Red and white.
Yeah, red, white, and black. Right? You see red, white, and black everywhere. From Coca-Cola to the Nazis. Okay? Yeah, right, there you go. But, you know, and it sounds ridiculous, but when you use a particular color palette, you are associating yourself in different ways. I'm not saying Coca-Cola is Nazis or the Nazis were big into Coca-Cola. Agvila thinks they might be, right? But there are particular uses of color that stand out and that get reused and that get strange associations with them, things like that, right? However, if you're in a pinch and you're trying to prototype something and you want to make something that uses color but that you're not going to spend a lot of time with, you can never go wrong with a shade of black, usually not full-on black, a shade of white, and then some other accent color with it, right? You can use any of the Google colors, a teal or a blue or something like that. It's a very safe way to go about using color. All right, so let's go a little bit further here. So here's an example of a color palette that's being used on some kind of app, which is interesting and confusing. Right? There's a picture of a person who looks like she's praying. Her shirt matches the icon. And we've got this sort of deep purple color here, right? And their guidelines are as always the primary color of your interface comes from that 500 selection. And then here we've got a couple of shades, and then we're using an accent color, which is green. And why is green looking pretty good with this? Why is that a high impact choice versus something like a red or another blue? Where on the color wheel is green relative to purple? Yeah. Let's have a look at good old Paleton over here. Right? Now, it's not as dramatically across, right? We're actually a little bit more adjacent here, but of course, the further that you get, the closer you get to being 180 degrees across the color wheel, the more complementary and the more clashing and struggling for dominance those colors can be. So, in the example from their material design guide, right, we're limiting the use of this accent color to very specific things. We wouldn't want to have like a gigantic, here's a big green text area right below this big purple text area. And the fact that the person in the photograph has a shirt that matches that accent color is no accident, right? They've chosen that very specifically to kind of drive home the overall sense of this palette. Okay. Yeah, so then here's their guides. And again, I want to stress this so somebody doesn't freak out and think that Google has written the entire rule set for how to use color. This is their particular set of very conservative, comfortable rules for using colors in very particular ways, right? So they're saying here, when using a primary color in your palette, this color should be the most widely used across all screens and components, right? So here they've chosen the indigo, and we've got both a tint and a shade, right? And here they're choosing a secondary color. And it's not just about what color looks pretty with it. They're saying which color, primary and secondary, what their function is within an interface. So here we're being told secondary colors work for a secondary or related action or some piece of information. Okay, we've got these variations here. Boom. So here's an example of that where we have the primary color being this blue, and then here on this additional action screen, we've got this mysterious star that shows up, right, that draws from that palette. Okay? And then, as any good design guide does, it has do's and don'ts, right? Don't run text in your accent color. And again, this is a highly conservative rule set. Here we've got the accent color in text, but what do we expect for that one word that's showing up in pink there? Can you see that? Why is it pink?
Because it's a link.
Okay, or it does something. There's something actionable about that little piece of text that, of course, would get lost if we ran all of the text in pink. What else is the problem of running all the text in pink? It's not nice to look at. There are plenty of people who would disagree with you about that. Is it that it's, I don't know, pink text can be kind of nice. Would you want to see it all over an entire app? Everybody's fishing for the obvious no that I'm heading for, but I want to get there for some reason. So beyond it's not nice to look at, right? Is there a more objective thing that we can say about text that's pink, or if it was cyan, or if it was magenta, or if it was light green? What's the problem with that from an interface standpoint?
It's too bright.
It's too bright. And when it's too bright on a white background, what do we lack?
Contrast.
Contrast. Thank you very much, right? So yes, we can all line up and say our favorite colors and the colors that we don't like as much, right? But we can always come back to, would you want to read this? That pink is very bright. It's in direct competition with that white background. And of course, if you're a person like me who doesn't want to be blinded, especially at night, like I always have my phone at a very low brightness setting, that becomes harder to read. Not that the whole world needs to accommodate me, but we need to choose we need to choose colors and schemes and text treatments that are going to be readable in the eventuality you're somebody like me who doesn't want to go be blinded in the middle of the night by my phone, and so I turn my brightness way down. Right? Somebody else might be doing that just because they want to try to save a little bit of battery power. Okay, here we have some examples, right? And this is pretty great. See how the accent color, if we just run that little plus sign action there in the same as the primary color, it's completely lost, right? Not only is it lost, it looks like a mistake, right? Doesn't that look like a mistake? Like maybe it should be up in the pink area with the rest of its pink friends, right? Whereas on the blue side, it's much more clear that that is a deliberate choice. Okay. Yeah, web links and buttons. Here we're using an accent color to do text highlighting. Yeah. And here we've got the little text. I don't know if you can see that, where that's being totally lost. And what's the problem? They're different colors, right? If that's as far as you stop thinking about color, like, well, they're different, right? But the contrast isn't enough, right? That red is too dark against this blue background. So here we've got one where at least we're doing something with a little bit more of a pink tint. It's going to be a little bit more readable. Okay. This part I definitely wanted to talk about today. So text opacity. Okay. So the Google guidelines, and these are darn good guidelines, especially considering what we can do in CSS right now. Text may be displayed with different degrees of opacity to convey how important certain information is relative to other information. Okay? So, and they've calculated very precise, I love this, like the very precise values. The most important text has an opacity of 87%. And the secondary text has an opacity of 54%, and text hints, like those in text fields and labels, and disabled text have an even lower visual prominence with an opacity of 38%. Now, why, Rosa, would you not I mean, look at this. Can we all agree that what we're looking at here are shades of gray? Why would they specify an opacity for these and not just some other shade of gray? See, this is really smart, what Google has done here. All right, if we do opacity, let's see, do they have a better example further down the page here? Yeah, here's exactly what's going on. So here's our just gray shade on a white background. We try to run that same gray shade over a pink. If the tone of those two things is a little bit too close, right, that second example becomes very difficult to read. But if we set text in black and achieve a gray shade based on a level of opacity, then our text becomes much more flexible. Aquila, with your green, very green website, right? It's what, though?
It's great.
It's great. But it might be worth it for you to try this, to see what happens if rather than doing a solid gray shade, if you did it as something that's a little bit more transparent. All right? We get into icons, and we can see how they work with themes, all of this stuff. Again, this is part of your week reading, so I don't want to ruin it for you, all the great surprises that lurk inside of there. But maybe for 5 seconds, let's just look at using some of these color tricks from the Google manual. Okay, so I've just got my gray shades here. I'm going to get rid of my helper baseline grid so I can really focus on the color here. And that is in this line. Okay, so I can reload this. And of course, all I've got are these sad little shades of gray. So, what if I followed to the letter the Google guidelines for how dark this text should be, right? My most important text, get our newsletter. We've got some secondary text, which is this little explanation. So what were my transparency levels on there? I meant to write them on the board, and of course I didn't think to. 1070 and 50, but here we go. The most important text has an opacity of 87%, 54%. What was the last one? 38%. Not that you could see that from where you're sitting. 84, 54, 38. Okay, so just trying this out. So I've got an H1, I've got a P, and I've got an OL, some list items with some labels in them. So how do we achieve opacity in CSS? What's one method that we can use? Anybody know? Okay, RGBA. Let's do that one second, because that's the one I like best. There's another one I want to try first. Anybody know? Turns out there actually is a property in CSS called opacity. And if it ever loads, we'll be able to see what it looks like. Now, and I'll demonstrate this if this ever loads. I almost dropped an F-bomb there. Did you hear that? I heard it. I felt it. Okay. So we can use opacity. We can say H1 opacity 84%. And if I go and load up my page again, of course, now this doesn't want to load either, because why would anything work? Okay. It's not percentage, it's a value 1 to 0. So if I want 84%, I have to do 0.84. All right. Oh, Lord, come on. Okay, you could probably not even detect how light that is from where you're sitting. Okay, 84% black on white is very close to black on white. Let's do our next one down, 54% on our sign up for our newsletter. Okay, can you detect that? It's a little bit more clearly grayed out. Right, again, we're specifying black here. And we might think, cool, who even cares about RGBA except when this happens, right? If we decide that our paragraph needs to have, and let's choose one of our nice Google-approved color. Let's use this, not the pink accent color. We'll do this by the book. Let's go back up. Let's go find pink. All right, 500. Here's our color value. E9, 1E63, like that. All right, so if I go back and set my background color like that, seriously. What's the problem? That doesn't look nice at all. Did Google lie to us? No. Well, what it has to do with is what that opacity property in CSS is setting. It is setting the opacity of the entire element, not just the text. So if you have a background image, you have a background color, you have anything else going on, or if you have child elements within that, they will inherit that level of opacity, which can make things really tricky. So that's why we want to go to the preferred RGBA, which of course in this case makes our life pretty easy because now all we have to do is drop in color, and then we use our RGBA functional notation. Whoop, let's get it right though. RGBA, where we do 0, 0, 0, those are our colors, and then 8.4 is our alpha channel. And we can do the same thing here on paragraph. Except we're not doing 8.4 here, we're doing 5.4. All right. There. I still don't love that, right? I would probably change that around since we've got that dark pink. Reload. There we go. That's still not great, right? It's readable, but it's not great. Okay. But again, this is supposed to be of secondary importance. If we're doing primary importance on this particular color, we'd bump that up all the way to 84. Let's see how that looks. Okay. Definitely more readable there. And of course, this is where we have to play around with what constitutes a shade and a color and all of these different things. Now let's see. Paint bucket matters. Right? I was talking about how when people paint rooms or paint walls, you with your site might be tempted to do this, like, ooh, we're going to use this pink color, and then, wow. Okay? You could do this. Absolutely. Would you want to read 5,000 words over this, regardless of the color of the words? Probably not. Again, why not? What happens to your eyeballs, Rosa? Yeah, it burns, right? This hurts Rosa, and when she looks away, she's going to see a giant sea of green. All right? We don't want Rosa to see green. Although maybe on a nasty winter's day, that's exactly what I see. Lots of nice green like that. Okay? All right. Let's drop. We'll drop this background color off of here for a second. And just for effect, let's try another one of the Google-approved colors. Maybe something in this teal range here, right? There's our 500 teal color. Again, these kinds of design guidelines, like Google's material design and some of Apple's guidelines, right? They love talking about material over at Apple too. Drop this in. Right, they're meant to be, they're like a Lego kit. Every piece is meant to work with every other piece. If you stick with these conservative 87, 54, and 38% of opacity, those will work on all of the other Google colors. Any of the single colors used from Google's palette. They've got a cute little video here.
There are no wrong colors.
I'm going to just mute it, just so we can look and see what they're doing with color. Right, so all of those shades and hues should look very familiar because these are all the colors that are in the Google palette. Yes, Matt? Right, that's their palette.
Do companies use this in the real world?
I don't know that a lot of people other than Google adhere to this very religiously. If you have any of the Google apps on your phone, like Calendar or Google Docs, or if you use any of those on the web, you'll see this palette in action. It's much like the default UI kit that you get from Apple. Let's look at that real quick. Oh, this slow DNS lookup is going to kill me. Yeah, that's more the developer reference. I want the visual reference. Get material components. Okay, so let's look at the iOS guidelines here. Because what you'll tend to see, to answer your question while I'm standing here waiting for the page to load, right, is that you'll see a lot of prototypes that I'll use. This is not very visual at all. I'm going to go and hunt that down. But you'll see apps that look like the system controls and things like that in iOS from startups that are trying to prototype it. Like they're not doing any of their own custom design. They're using Apple's built-in, this is what a slider, this is what a switch, all of those things. What they look like, they'll use colors similar to Apple. The same thing goes for Google Material Design. Because the risk that you run, let's say you come up with some fabulous app and you decide to do the entire thing as Google Material Design or as Bootstrap or whatever framework you can find. Your product that you've made looks like it was made by them, which kind of washes your own unique contribution, washes your brand out. So why I have you read the Google Material Design rather than implement it, right? If I was a nice and kind professor, which is everybody knows I'm not, but if I were, I would be just like, hey, for project one, just go apply the nice Google Material Design to your project, right? I could have solved so many problems for you by just saying stick with it. Same thing if we said, just go use Bootstrap, right? Which plenty of people are like, yeah, just go use Bootstrap. Which my brother, the developer, says Bootstrap, like, isn't that what you use when you don't have a class, like human-computer interaction, right? So, but that's not to bash Material Design or Bootstrap. Study it. Look at all of the different sort of factors that they put into designing these things, choosing the particular colors that they did, choosing the particular shades and treatments of them, and thinking about that as a way to go about designing your site. Something that I've done in other courses, I didn't do it with you guys, but I'm a big fan of these things called style tiles, which hopefully it was a little kind of startup micro site. Hopefully it hasn't gone away. We might not know because who knows if it's ever going to line up. Okay, yeah, style tiles. So it's got a cute little URL, styletil.es. And there's a list apart article as well. Seriously, this is so unacceptable. Okay, so they've got templates and stuff that you can download, but what I'm more interested in, again, is not the actual, like, oh, here's some Photoshop files that you can use, but I'm more interested in the examples that they create. So here's a fictitious design for a newspaper called The Examiner. And what they've done here is to do some basic typography, like here are the typefaces that we're going to use, here's the colors that we're going to run them in, and then here's some example of different kinds of design patterns. Here's our possible palette colors. And then here is sort of like, does anybody watch HGTV? Okay, a couple people admit to it. You ever watch like the home decoration shows or the, what's the one? The Woman from Canada. Sarah's house. She goes and buys some house and then redecorates it for a budget. Anyway, all of those designers on there, they all have mood boards, right? Like they've got swatches of fabric and things that they ripped out of magazines, right? That's not a bad thing at all. And of course, when you're testing out a typeface like they're doing here, it's not a bad idea at all to use words like you want your design to convey and see how they actually work in your layout, right? Everybody remember the typeface Trajan, right? The real Roman thing. Like friendly does not work in Trajan, right? That's friendly with somebody who's got their fist clenched and they're ready to like pop you in the face, right? So I want to make sure that the typefaces that we're choosing are actually going to convey that kind of thing. We can look at some of their other things. So these work really well as sort of very quick references, unescapable. Right? So coming up with these sort of smaller things so that you don't have to do a 400-page reference like Google Material Design for whatever project it is you're designing, but you've got something that you can kind of fall back on and that you can share across the team so that everybody's sort of on the same visual grammatical page. Like that. All right, I'm done. I think we should be done. Unless anybody's going to feel ripped off if we're done now. Does that work? I believe I'm caught up on all of the outstanding comments and emails and things that I had to respond to. If I haven't responded to you, that means I ignored you or neglected you somehow, in which case can you please just ping me or something and inform me that I ignored you or neglected you. It was not intentional. And that's it. Projects are due next Wednesday night. That's all I got. All right. Have a good weekend. Get out and enjoy this nice day. All right. Thank you so much.
From that Nazi stuff to Nazi